Picture this. It's March 13th, 1997, just past 8 in the evening in Phoenix, Arizona. The sky is clear, the air warm, just another quiet night in the desert. Then, without warning, something impossible appears. Hundreds of people look up to see a formation of massive, silent lights, arranged in a perfect V-shape, gliding slowly overhead. These aren't blinking aircraft or fleeting meteors. They're enormous, glowing orbs hovering with an otherworldly calm. Witnesses describe a craft so vast it blocks out the stars, moving with a precision that defies anything man-made. The event lasts for minutes, stretching across the state, leaving thousands of people stunned, terrified, and utterly bewildered. This wasn't a handful of isolated sightings. It was a phenomenon witnessed by countless credible observers, pilots, police officers, even a governor. And yet, decades later, the Phoenix Lights remain one of the most compelling UFO mysteries of all time. What unfolded that night was no ordinary sighting. The sheer scale of it, the way those lights lingered, the way they vanished without a trace, challenges every explanation thrown at it. Was it a secret military test, some advanced aircraft kept hidden from the public, or could it have been something far more extraordinary, something not of this world? The official statements, first dismissing it as flares, then backtracking, only deepened the mystery. Witnesses weren't just seeing things, they were encountering something that defied logic, something that left even skeptics questioning what they knew about the skies above us. Tonight, we're diving deep into the enigma of the Phoenix Lights. We'll unravel the eyewitness accounts, sift through the declassified documents, and explore the theories that still divide experts to this day. This isn't just a story about lights in the sky. It's a puzzle that touches on secrecy, technology, and perhaps even the boundaries of human understanding. By the end, you'll see why this event refuses to fade into obscurity, and why it might just hold the key to one of the biggest questions of all: are we truly alone? The answers, or lack thereof, might just change how you look at the night sky forever. As the sun dipped below the horizon on that March evening, Phoenix settled into its usual rhythm. Families finishing dinner, traffic thinning on the highways, the desert air cooling just enough to bring relief. Then, around 8:30, the first calls began flooding emergency lines. Dispatchers assumed it was a prank at first. How could hundreds of people be reporting the same impossible thing? But the voices on the other end of the line weren't laughing. They were trembling. A retired police officer in Prescott swore he'd never seen anything like it, a cluster of amber lights, motionless at first, then gliding soundlessly across the sky. A commercial pilot over Tucson radioed air traffic control, demanding to know what kind of military exercise could involve something that massive. Parents in Sedona gathered their children on the porch, pointing at what looked like a floating mountain blotting out the stars. The scale of what unfolded still defies belief. From the Nevada border to the outskirts of Tucson, over 60 miles apart, people saw the same unearthly formation. Witness sketches and videos, grainy but chilling, show a geometric pattern of lights, some describing a boomerang shape wider than 3 football fields. One air traffic controller later admitted that radar picked up an object moving at impossible speeds before it vanished near Phoenix, but the most haunting accounts came from those directly beneath it. A Vietnam veteran in Paulden stood frozen in his driveway, watching the lights pass low enough to cast shadows on his lawn. No wings, no engines, he told reporters. Just silence. Even the governor at the time, Fife Symington, initially mocked the reports, only to confess years later that he, too, had seen something he couldn't explain. What makes the Phoenix Lights so extraordinary isn't just the sightings themselves, but the collective weight of those who witnessed them. This wasn't a handful of UFO enthusiasts spotting blurry dots in the distance. It was nurses, airline mechanics, off-duty firefighters, people trained to observe details, all insisting this was unlike any aircraft they'd ever encountered. The military's explanation: flares dropped during an exercise, but flares don't hover for hours or travel in perfect formation across hundreds of miles. They don't vanish without a trace, leaving even seasoned pilots questioning everything they know about flight. That night, the desert sky didn't just show people something strange. It showed them something that refused to fit into the world as they understood it. The first wave of sightings that night centered around something utterly inexplicable: a formation of light so precise, so massive, it rewrote the rules of what people believed could exist in their skies. Witnesses from Prescott to Phoenix described the same eerie spectacle: a V-shaped cluster of amber orbs gliding silently overhead with the slow, deliberate motion of something under intelligent control. The shape wasn't haphazard. It was geometric, almost mechanical, with lights evenly spaced along what appeared to be the edges of a single, solid structure. One witness, a retired airline mechanic, later sketched the object from memory, his hand trembling as he drew a craft wider than 3 Boeing 747s lined up wingtip to wingtip. It wasn't just lights, he insisted. There was a dark mass between them, like a shadow blocking out the stars. Then Governor Fife Symington initially dismissed the reports with a joke, trotting out his chief of staff in an alien costume during a press conference. But years later, he admitted the truth: he'd seen it too. Standing outside his home that night, Symington described a gigantic, otherworldly craft moving soundlessly across the sky. It defied logic, he confessed. No human technology could maneuver like that. His reversal wasn't just startling, it lent credibility to hundreds of ordinary people who'd been ridiculed for telling the same story. The consistency of these accounts is what chills investigators to this day. A schoolteacher in Glendale watched the V formation pass low enough to illuminate her backyard, like a second sunset. A group of construction workers in Temp dropped their tools, staring as the lights drifted overhead, slower than any plane but without a single engine sound. Radar operators at Sky Harbor Airport later confirmed an unidentified blip moving at impossible speeds before vanishing near the Estrella Mountains. But perhaps the most haunting detail came from a pair of Marine Corps pilots training that night near the Arizona-Nevada border. They radioed in asking about the enormous black triangle shadowing their jets, only to be told no aircraft matching that description were in the area. What emerged from these testimonies wasn't just a UFO sighting, but a collective encounter with something that seemed to operate outside known physics. Witnesses agreed on details no hoax could coordinate: the way the lights appeared to be part of a single, solid structure, the absence of sound even at close range, the way the craft's silhouette blotted out constellations as it passed. This wasn't a case of misidentified planes or weather balloons. It was an event that left even the most hardened skeptics grappling with questions they couldn't answer. And the strangest part, this was only the beginning. The night's true mystery would unfold hours later when a second wave of lights appeared, this time in a formation no one could explain. Just when witnesses thought the night couldn't get stranger, a second act unfolded, one that would deepen the mystery even further. Around 10 p.m., as the initial V-shaped formation faded from view, new lights appeared over the city of Phoenix. These weren't the same massive, structured craft from earlier. These were smaller, glowing orbs hovering almost motionless in the night sky. Unlike the coordinated movement of the first sighting, these lights seemed independent, pulsing softly as if alive. Dozens of residents reported them hanging in place for nearly half an hour, casting an eerie glow over rooftops and desert ridges. The contrast between the two events was impossible to ignore. Where the first formation had been a single, cohesive entity, the orbs behaved differently, some drifting lazily, others flickering in and out of view. A nurse working the night shift at a Phoenix hospital described them as like fireflies, but huge, each one the size of a car, just floating there like they were watching us. A group of teenagers filming from a backyard captured shaky footage of the lights suddenly darting apart, then converging again in a way no known aircraft could replicate. Official explanations quickly pointed to flares, specifically Air Force exercises involving illumination flares dropped during nighttime training, but the details didn't add up. Witnesses noted the lights didn't descend like flares would. They held their position, sometimes for minutes at a time, with no smoke or telltale trails. Even more baffling, radar operators at Luke Air Force Base confirmed no scheduled flare activity in the area during those precise hours. The military's later admission that flares were deployed elsewhere that night only fueled speculation. Were these lights a diversion, or was something far stranger hovering over Phoenix? Skeptics offered alternative theories: drones, experimental aircraft, even mass hysteria. But drone technology in 1997 wasn't advanced enough to explain the orb's reported size or behavior. As for hysteria, the witnesses weren't a panicked crowd. They were individuals in separate locations, many with no prior interest in UFOs, all describing the same inexplicable glow. One airline mechanic, skeptical by profession, admitted, "I spent my career around engines. What I saw that night didn't just defy physics, it laughed at it." What lingered after the lights vanished wasn't just confusion, but a profound question. Were these orbs connected to the earlier V-shaped craft, or an entirely separate phenomenon? The two events shared only one undeniable trait: they left those who saw them forever certain of one thing. The sky that night held secrets no earthly explanation could fully unravel. And the deeper you dig into the witness testimonies, the clearer it becomes Phoenix didn't just experience a UFO sighting. It became ground zero for a mystery that refuses to fade. Among the hundreds who saw the Phoenix lights, some of the most compelling testimonies came from those trained to observe the skies with professional precision. Commercial pilot Trig Johnston, flying near Phoenix that night, radioed air traffic control the moment he spotted the formation. His voice crackled with disbelief as he described a solid V-shaped structure, not just lights, moving slower than any aircraft I've ever seen, completely silent. Radar operators confirmed his account, tracking an object with no transponder signal maneuvering in ways that defied conventional aerodynamics. Equally startling were reports from law enforcement. Sergeant Mitchell Stanley of the Phoenix Police Department was driving his patrol car when he pulled over, mesmerized by what he later called a city block-sized shadow gliding overhead. His dashboard camera captured nothing, a detail that haunted him. "It didn't show up on video, but I watched it block out stars with my own eyes," he admitted. Nearby, a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel stood in his backyard, gripping his coffee mug as the lights passed. "I've seen classified aircraft at Area 51, he told investigators. This wasn't ours. Then there were the military witnesses. A group of National Guardsmen conducting night exercises near the Estrella Mountains reported their radios filled with static as the lights hovered above. One soldier, a 10-year veteran, described the moment his training failed him. "We're taught to identify every threat. This thing moved like nothing in the manual. No exhaust, no sound, just wrong." Another, a helicopter mechanic, insisted the object's structure defied physics. "It made turns no aircraft could survive," he said, like it wasn't bound by inertia. But perhaps the most chilling accounts came from the emotional toll. A seasoned 911 dispatcher, accustomed to calming frantic callers, found her own hands shaking as she logged reports. "Grown men were crying," she recalled. "One caller whispered, 'Whatever this is, it knows we're watching.'" Even skeptics like Dr. Lin Kai-tai, a physician who initially dismissed UFO claims, became believers after witnessing the lights from her balcony. "It wasn't fear I felt," she confessed. "It was this overwhelming sense that the rules of reality had shifted. These weren't vague stories from distant observers. They were first-hand, visceral accounts from professionals whose careers depended on clear-eyed assessment." when a traffic helicopter pilot, a man who spent his life navigating Phoenix's airspace, described the lights as something out of a science fiction movie. It carried weight. When a retired fighter pilot admitted, "I've never felt so small," it resonated. Together, their testimonies formed an undeniable pattern. That night, the skies over Arizona hosted something beyond human understanding, and those who saw it were forever changed. The emotional undercurrent in these stories is as revealing as the details themselves. A firefighter who'd battled blazes for decades broke down describing the light's eerie intelligence. A school principal who'd spent her career grounded in logic found herself questioning everything she knew. "It wasn't just what we saw," one witness summed up. "It was how it made us feel like the universe was far stranger than we'd been told." That collective awe, that shared rupture in ordinary perception, may be the most lasting legacy of the Phoenix Lights. Because when pilots, police, and soldiers, people trained to trust their senses, all agree they encountered the inexplicable, it demands more than dismissal. It demands answers, and yet the most baffling chapter of the Phoenix Lights wasn't written by witnesses at all. It came days later when the government offered an explanation that raised more questions than it settled. An official statement so at odds with the evidence, it would only deepen the mystery for decades to come. In the days following the Phoenix Lights event, something almost as strange as the lights themselves unfolded: a near-total media blackout. Despite thousands of witnesses, frantic emergency calls, and even credible reports from pilots and law enforcement, major news outlets remained eerily silent. Local stations in Phoenix initially buried the story, if they covered it at all. One anchor reportedly quipped off air, "We're not doing UFOs, we'll sound like tabloids." It wasn't until days later, when amateur footage of the massive V-shaped formation began circulating, that journalists reluctantly acknowledged something extraordinary had occurred. Even then, the tone was dismissive, with headlines like "Mystery Lights Baffle Residents" tucked between weather reports and sports scores. Behind the scenes, whispers swirled about why the story was being suppressed. Some journalists later admitted receiving unusual pushback from higher-ups. A producer at one Phoenix news station recalled being told, "Leave it alone unless the Pentagon confirms it." Others hinted at pressure from advertisers or military contractors with ties to the region. The most telling moment came when a reporter for the Arizona Republic managed to get a hold of air traffic control recordings, only to have the story mysteriously reassigned to another writer who watered it down. "It felt deliberate," the reporter confessed years later, "like we were being steered away from the truth. The military's response only thickened the fog." Initially, officials claimed no aircraft were operating in the area that night, a statement directly contradicted by radar data and pilot testimonies. Then, weeks later, the narrative shifted. The lights were merely flares from an Air National Guard exercise. Problem was, those flares were dropped near the Barry Goldwater Range, over 60 miles southwest of Phoenix, hours after the first sightings. Even more suspicious, the military waited months to release that explanation, long enough for public interest to wane. Skeptics pointed out that flares don't hover motionless or travel in geometric formations, nor do they vanish without leaving smoke trails. As one aviation expert put it, flares don't block out stars. Whatever those witnesses saw, it wasn't a training exercise. Theories about the media blackout range from the practical to the paranoid. Some argue outlets feared ridicule. After all, UFO stories were still the punchline of late-night jokes in the 90s. Others suspect military pressure, given Arizona's dense network of bases and testing ranges. The most unsettling possibility, that authorities themselves didn't know what had appeared over Phoenix, and silence was preferable to admitting powerlessness. Whatever the reason, the delay in coverage had lasting consequences. By the time national media picked up the story, the trail had gone cold. Witnesses had been mocked into silence, and the Phoenix Lights were already being dismissed as a mass hallucination. The truth, it seemed, was being edited out in real time, not with a cover-up but with a collective shrug. What's undeniable is the effect this silence had on those who witnessed the lights. Many described feeling gaslit by the media, by officials, even by friends who joked about alien fever. A school teacher who'd gathered her students to watch the lights later tearfully recounted how colleagues dismissed her as the UFO lady. A police officer, fearing career repercussions, scrubbed his official report of any mention of the encounter. The message was clear: seeing something unexplainable came with a price. And yet the footage survived, the testimonies piled up, and slowly, against all odds, the Phoenix lights refused to be forgotten because some truths are too big to stay buried. This wasn't just a failure of journalism. It was a case study in how uncomfortable truths get smoothed over, how eyewitness accounts get rewritten as folklore, and how easily the unexplained gets filed away as unimportant. The real mystery isn't just what hovered over Phoenix that night, it's why so many worked so hard to pretend it never happened, and that perhaps is the most telling clue of all. The military's official explanation arrived like a deflated balloon weeks after the Phoenix lights captivated the nation. In a press briefing that felt more like an afterthought, Air Force representatives claimed the lights were simply flares dropped during an A-10 Warthog training exercise near the Barry Goldwater Range. On paper, it seemed plausible. The flares, they said, were designed to illuminate targets at night, burning brightly as they slowly descended under small parachutes. But the moment investigators started pulling at the threads, the entire story began to unravel. First, the timing made no sense. The flare drop occurred around 10 p.m., nearly 2 hours after the initial wave of sightings began. Witnesses who'd seen the massive V-shaped craft at 8:30 were baffled. How could flares explain something they'd watched glide silently overhead before the exercise even started? Even more damning, the flares were released 60 miles southwest of Phoenix, yet people across the entire metropolitan area reported lights directly overhead. Physics itself disputed the claim. Flares don't hover motionless for minutes, don't travel in perfect formation, and certainly don't block out constellations like witnesses described. Then there was the behavior of the lights. Flares drift downward, swaying slightly as their parachutes catch the wind. What thousands saw that night were orbs holding steady altitude, sometimes darting horizontally with impossible precision. A meteorologist who studied atmospheric conditions that evening pointed out another flaw. The wind patterns would have carried flare smoke southwest away from the city. Yet every witness reported crystal clear skies, no smoke trails, no debris, just those eerie, self-contained lights. Worst of all was the reaction from those who'd seen both military flares and the Phoenix lights firsthand. A retired Marine Corps pilot familiar with A-10 operations scoffed at the explanation. Flares flicker, they sputter, they don't move in unison like some choreographed ballet, he said. And they sure as hell don't vanish midair without a trace. Even Governor Fife Symington, initially a skeptic, later admitted the flare theory didn't come close to matching what I witnessed. The skepticism turned to outright disbelief in 2015, when declassified documents revealed strange inconsistencies. Air Force logs from that night showed no scheduled flare exercises in the exact time frame claimed. Radar operators had noted an unidentified object moving at speeds no flare could achieve, yet those records were conspicuously absent from the official report. Most telling was a single line buried in a Pentagon memo. No conventional explanation fully accounts for all witness testimonies. What emerged wasn't just a botched cover-up, but a glaring disconnect between the military story and the sheer weight of evidence. The flare explanation wasn't merely incomplete, it felt like a placeholder, a way to placate the public without addressing the uncomfortable truth that something extraordinary had slipped through the cracks of official understanding. And for those who'd stood beneath those lights, no amount of bureaucratic paperwork could erase what they knew in their bones. that night the rules of the known world didn't apply. The deeper irony, in trying to dismiss the Phoenix Lights, the government inadvertently made the case for their strangeness stronger than ever. Because when you have to ignore radar data, discredit trained observers, and bend physics itself to fit a narrative, maybe the truth isn't in the explanation, but in everything it refuses to acknowledge. 17 miles west of downtown Phoenix, Luke Air Force Base hums with activity, home to some of the most advanced fighter pilot training in the world. Its proximity to the Phoenix Light sightings has fueled decades of speculation. Could those mysterious lights have been something far more terrestrial than extraterrestrial? The base's silence in the wake of the event only deepened the intrigue. While officials swiftly dismissed any connection, whistleblowers and aviation experts have pointed to a tantalizing possibility. What if the Phoenix Lights were the accidental reveal of a classified aircraft being tested under the cover of desert darkness? The theory gains traction when you examine the era. The 90s were a golden age for stealth technology, with rumors swirling about next-generation aircraft like the mythical Aurora, a hypersonic spy plane allegedly capable of speeds exceeding Mach 5. Declassified documents later confirmed the existence of black-budget projects with capabilities bordering on science fiction. Former Lockheed engineers have hinted that certain prototypes could manipulate light refraction, creating optical illusions or even appearing nearly invisible. One retired test pilot, speaking anonymously, described aircraft so quiet they made owls sound loud, and maneuvers that should have torn the wings off anything we've built. But the devil's in the discrepancies. Witnesses of the Phoenix Lights reported the object moving at speeds no known aircraft could sustain without sonic booms, yet the night remained eerily silent. The sheer size described, some estimating the craft at over a mile wide, dwarfs even the most ambitious stealth concepts. And then there's the behavior, hovering motionless, executing right-angle turns, vanishing without a trace. These aren't just advanced engineering feats, they defy fundamental physics as we understand them. As one aerospace physicist put it, you'd need propulsion systems that rewrite Newton's laws to explain what those witnesses saw. Luke AFB's tight-lipped stance raises more eyebrows. Despite multiple Freedom of Information Act requests, the military has never released full radar data from that night. A former air traffic controller claimed privately that 2 F-16 pilots were scrambled to intercept the lights only to return, pale as ghosts, and immediately debriefed in a classified session. The base's public affairs office, when pressed, repeats the same canned response. No military operations coincided with the Phoenix Lights event. But in the world of black projects, denial is standard protocol. After all, the existence of the F-117 stealth fighter was flatly denied for years before its official unveiling. Could the truth be a blend of both theories? Some researchers propose a hybrid explanation, that the initial V-shaped formation might have been a classified drone swarm or next-gen surveillance platform, while the later orbs were diversionary flares meant to muddy the waters. It's a tactic with precedent during Cold War exercises. The military often used flares and chaff to mask experimental aircraft signatures. But even this theory stumbles when confronted with the overwhelming consistency of witness accounts describing a singular, structured craft. The real sticking point isn't just secrecy, it's scale. No military, no matter how advanced, has ever admitted to possessing technology matching the Phoenix Lights' reported capabilities. Not then, not now, and that leaves us with an unsettling question. If what flew over Phoenix wasn't ours and it wasn't theirs, then whose was it? The answer might lie not in the shadows of classified hangars, but in the unblinking accounts of thousands who still insist, decades later, that what they saw belonged to no world they recognized. For the UFO community, the Phoenix Lights weren't just another sighting, they were a seismic event. The kind of case that rewrote the rules of what believers thought possible. Almost overnight, ufologists descended on Arizona, armed with cameras, sketchpads, and a hunger for answers. Leading the charge was Stanton Friedman, the nuclear physicist turned celebrity UFO investigator who called the Phoenix Lights the most credible mass sighting in history. With his trademark bow tie and relentless skepticism toward official explanations, Friedman tore into the military's flare theory, pointing out glaring inconsistencies, the lack of smoke trails, the impossible maneuvers, the sheer number of trained observers who swore this was no ordinary aircraft. When you have a governor, pilots, and cops all saying the same thing, Friedman quipped in one interview, "It's time to stop blaming swamp gas." The lights quickly became a cornerstone of UFO lore, featured in documentaries, conferences, and even congressional hearings. UFO groups meticulously catalogued eyewitness accounts, noting eerie similarities, descriptions of a low-frequency hum some claimed to feel in their bones, the way animals reportedly grew restless before the lights appeared. Websites buzzed with pixelated footage and enhanced images, each new analysis fueling deeper fascination. But the community wasn't monolithic. Some researchers, like Dr. Bruce Maccabee, focused on the physics, calculating the object's estimated size and energy output. Others, like paranormal investigator Linda Moulton Howe, speculated about possible connections to ancient indigenous legends of sky beings. The diversity of theories spoke to something bigger. This wasn't just about lights in the sky. It was about the human need to make sense of the unexplainable. Skeptics, of course, had their own take. Organizations like the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry dismissed the sightings as a mix of misidentified military flares and mass hysteria. Astronomer Phil Plait famously argued that the human brain is wired to see patterns, even when none exist. People want to believe, he wrote, so they connect dots that aren't really there. Yet even the most ardent debunkers struggled to explain away the volume and consistency of testimonies. How could so many people independently describe the same unearthly craft? The divide between believers and skeptics grew so pronounced that Phoenix became a cultural short, and less a city than a battleground over what constituted proof. What made the Phoenix Lights unique wasn't just the scale of the event, but the way it forced even casual observers to pick a side. You either trusted the hundreds of witnesses, ordinary people with no agenda, or you trusted institutions with a long history of secrecy. For believers, the lights were validation, a smoking gun in a decades-long argument. For skeptics, they were a cautionary tale about gullibility, and for everyone else, they were a reminder that some mysteries refuse neat explanations. The real legacy of the Phoenix Lights might not be in the answers they provided, but in the questions they left hanging, questions about what we think we know and what might still be hiding in plain sight. Years after the Phoenix Lights, a bizarre and slickly produced video surfaced that threatened to overshadow the genuine mystery with sensationalism. Titled The Alien Interview, it claimed to show a surviving extraterrestrial from a crashed UFO being interrogated by shadowy government agents. The grainy black and white footage, complete with eerie sound effects and a shaky camera, went viral until investigators noticed inconsistencies. The aliens' movements were too human, the interrogation room suspiciously resembled a Hollywood set, and the classified timestamps didn't match any known military format. Within weeks, the hoax unraveled, traced back to a group of film students in California who admitted it was an elaborate art project, but the damage was done. Skeptics seized on it, lumping the entire Phoenix Lights phenomenon into the same category of debunked fakery. This pattern repeated over the years, blurry photos doctored with early Photoshop, staged eyewitness testimonies by attention seekers, even a faux documentary claiming the lights were holograms tested by the Pentagon. Each hoax chipped away at the credibility of genuine witnesses. The irony was brutal. People who'd been ridiculed for reporting what they saw now faced another layer of distrust, their accounts drowned out by the noise of manufactured drama. It's like shouting into a hurricane, one witness lamented. The louder you tell the truth, the more it gets lost in the storm. The fallout went beyond mere frustration. Legitimate researchers found their work undermined. forced to waste time debunking obvious fakes instead of analyzing credible evidence. Journalists already wary of UFO stories grew even more hesitant to cover sightings, fearing association with the circus of conspiracies. Even within the UFO community, divisions deepened. Some clung to every new leak as proof, while others, like veteran investigator James Fox, argued passionately for stricter scrutiny. "The truth doesn't need smoke and mirrors," Fox insisted. "When we amplify hoaxes, we become part of the disinformation problem." Yet buried beneath the noise were sobering questions. Why did these hoaxes resonate so deeply? Maybe because they tapped into a very real hunger for answers the government couldn't or wouldn't provide. In the absence of official transparency, people filled the void with stories, some earnest, some exploitative. The tragedy wasn't just the deception, it was how the spectacle distracted from the core mystery, that thousands of credible people, from pilots to police, still had no explanation for what they witnessed that night in Phoenix. And every fake alien interview, every doctored photo, pushed that truth further into the shadows. The lesson here isn't just about spotting fakes, it's about how easily truth gets tangled in a web of lies when those in power stay silent. Because when authorities dismiss without explaining, when media mocks instead of investigates, they leave the door wide open for charlatans, and the real story slips away unnoticed. The Phoenix Lights deserve better, the witnesses deserve better, and anyone who's ever looked at the night sky and wondered, they deserve the truth, unvarnished by hoaxes, unfiltered by agenda. Because in the end, the biggest threat to uncovering what really happened isn't the lies we tell each other, it's the lies we start to believe. Among the more grounded explanations for the Phoenix Lights is a theory rooted in the bizarre behavior of plasma, that mysterious fourth state of matter where gases become electrified and capable of defying conventional physics. Atmospheric plasma phenomena, sometimes called sprites or ball lightning, have long been documented as fleeting, glowing orbs that appear during thunderstorms or near high-energy electrical fields. Some physicists argue that under rare conditions, large-scale plasma formations could theoretically explain certain UFO sightings, acting like naturally occurring holograms in the sky, bending light and moving with eerie autonomy. But when you line up this hypothesis against the Phoenix Lights, the gaps become impossible to ignore. Take the work of Dr. David Freiberger, a retired Stanford physicist who studied high-energy plasma for decades. He's quick to point out that while plasma can mimic some characteristics of the Phoenix Lights, the glow, the apparent lack of solid structure, it can't account for the event's defining features. Natural plasma discharges last seconds, not the sustained half-hour spectacle over Arizona. They don't hold geometric formations or execute coordinated turns. And critically, they're chaotic, flickering and pulsating unpredictably, not gliding with the slow, purposeful motion described by witnesses. Plasma is a tornado, not a ballet, Freiberger noted. What those people saw behaved with intentionality, as if guided by intelligence or some vastly sophisticated control mechanism. Even more damning for the plasma theory are the environmental conditions that night. The Arizona sky was clear and stable, no thunderstorms, no atmospheric disturbances that typically spawn such phenomena. Engineers at the nearby Palo Verde nuclear generating station confirmed no unusual electrical activity. And then there's the sheer scale. Plasma formations, even in laboratory settings, rarely exceed a few meters in size. The Phoenix Lights were described as stretching over a mile wide, an order of magnitude beyond anything plasma physics can currently explain. Dr. Massimo Teodorani, an Italian astrophysicist who spent years studying anomalous light phenomena, offers a nuanced take. After analyzing footage from Phoenix, he acknowledges similarities to plasma but highlights one chilling inconsistency: the light's apparent interaction with witnesses. Multiple observers reported the orbs seeming to respond to their movements, pulsing brighter when pointed at, or shifting direction when groups gathered. Plasma doesn't react to human presence, Teodorani stresses. If those accounts are accurate, we're dealing with something far more complex than atmospheric physics. The plasma theory isn't without merit. In other cases, like the Hestaland lights of Norway, similar phenomena have been tentatively linked to ionized gases interacting with subterranean minerals. But crucially, those lights behave radically differently, appearing in predictable locations, lasting mere minutes, and lacking the structured precision of the Phoenix formation. Even the most generous plasma models strain to explain how such a phenomenon could traverse hundreds of miles while maintaining perfect symmetry, or why it would appear only once in recorded history over Arizona. What emerges isn't just a rejection of the plasma explanation, but a revelation about the Phoenix lights themselves. The closer scientists examine them, the more they defy categorization. Not quite aircraft, not quite natural phenomena, they occupy a liminal space between known physics and something beyond, an anomaly that doesn't just challenge our understanding of the skies, but redefines what we consider possible. And that, perhaps, is why the debate endures, because when even the most rigorous scientific explanations fall short, the door cracks open to far more profound questions that don't just live in laboratories, but in the very way we perceive our place in the cosmos. When thousands of people report seeing the same unexplainable phenomenon, skepticism inevitably turns to psychology. Could the Phoenix lights have been a case of mass hysteria? The human mind is notoriously susceptible to suggestion, especially in high-stress situations. History is littered with examples of collective delusion, from the Salem witch trials to the 1930s War of the Worlds radio broadcast panic. Psychologists point to concepts like social contagion, where fear spreads through a crowd like a virus, distorting perception until ordinary objects, a weather balloon, a flock of birds, become something extraordinary in the shared imagination. The theory seems tempting at first glance: a quiet desert night, a sudden anomaly in the sky, and the power of groupthink doing the rest. But the cracks in this explanation appear the moment you examine the witness testimonies in detail. Mass hysteria typically produces inconsistent accounts. People see what they expect to see, based on cultural cues or prior fears. The Phoenix lights, however, were described with eerie uniformity by observers miles apart, many of whom had no contact with each other. A pilot over Tucson didn't hear the frantic calls to Phoenix police before reporting the same massive V-shape. A retired mechanic in Prescott didn't know a schoolteacher in Glendale was sketching an identical silhouette. Even more telling, these weren't impressionable bystanders. They were trained professionals, military personnel, air traffic controllers, law enforcement people conditioned to assess situations with cold objectivity. Cognitive scientists have studied how stress can warp perception, but they also acknowledge its limits. Optical illusions, after all, follow predictable patterns. A distant plane mistaken for a hovering light, or Venus misread as an unnatural glow. What they don't explain is how hundreds of witnesses independently described a structured craft with specific, geometric precision, right down to the number of lights and their exact spacing. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, a renowned expert in memory and perception, admits the Phoenix case defies typical misidentification. When you have multiple observers with no shared context agreeing on granular details, size, movement, even sound, or rather the lack of it, you're dealing with something more than cognitive error, she notes. The real clincher: time. Mass hysteria events are fleeting, dissolving once the adrenaline fades. The Phoenix lights, though, left a lasting mark. Decades later, witnesses recall the event with crisp clarity, their stories unnervingly aligned. Some even reported physical effects static on radios, animals behaving erratically, details too consistent to dismiss as imagination. If this was collective delusion, it operated on a scale and duration psychology has no framework for. The mind can play tricks, yes, but when the same trick is witnessed by thousands across miles over hours with no crowd to influence them, the simpler explanation isn't hysteria. It's that they saw exactly what they claimed, and that realization changes everything. The Phoenix Lights weren't an isolated phenomenon. They were part of a recurring pattern etched across the globe, a series of mass sightings that defy easy explanation. Half a world away, just 7 years before Phoenix, Belgium experienced its own wave of UFO encounters so compelling they prompted official government investigations. Between November 1989 and April 1990, over 2,000 people reported seeing enormous, silent triangular crafts hovering over towns and highways. Like Phoenix, these weren't vague dots in the sky. Police officers, military personnel, and civilians described a black triangular structure with 3 blinding white lights at its corners, sometimes so low treetops swayed in its wake. Radar operators at NATO Glon Station even tracked the object accelerating from 0 to 1,000 miles per hour in seconds, a maneuver no known aircraft could survive. The Belgian Air Force scrambled F-16 jets to intercept it, only to watch helplessly as the craft outmaneuvered them with impossible agility. Sound familiar? Then there's the baffling case of Chicago's O'Hare Airport in November 2006. Dozens of airport employees, pilots, mechanics, FAA personnel witnessed a metallic, saucer-shaped craft hovering silently over Gate C-17. Unlike typical UFO reports, this one unfolded in broad daylight, with multiple trained observers watching as the object suddenly shot upward, punching a perfect hole through the cloud layer before vanishing. The FAA initially claimed it was weather phenomena, then backtracked when meteorologists pointed out the sky had been clear. Like Phoenix, the official explanation crumbled under scrutiny, leaving behind a residue of unanswered questions. What binds these events together isn't just their scale or credibility, it's their eerie consistency. Witnesses from Arizona to Belgium to Chicago report crafts with similar geometries, triangles, boomerangs, or Vs. They describe the same unnatural silence, the same defiance of physics, the same unsettling sense of being observed. Even more striking is the reaction of authorities: initial denials, followed by reluctant acknowledgements, then explanations that collapse under their own weight. It's as if these sightings share a playbook, one that plays out repeatedly across decades and continents. Could these parallels hint at something beyond mere coincidence? Some researchers propose they're glimpses of the same advanced technology, whether human-built or otherwise, being tested or deployed in phases. Others see a cultural fingerprint, arguing that UFO shapes evolve with our collective imagination. But this theory stumbles when you consider historical accounts. Long before science fiction popularized flying saucers, medieval manuscripts recorded sky ships with uncanny resemblances to modern sightings. The deeper you dig, the clearer it becomes. These patterns aren't inventions of the modern mind. They're echoes of something far older, far stranger, a mystery that doesn't just span borders but centuries. The most unsettling possibility, that these mass sightings are interconnected threads in a larger tapestry we've barely begun to unravel. When identical phenomena emerge independently across time and space, witnessed by people with no shared language or culture, it forces us to confront a humbling truth. Whatever hovered over Phoenix, Belgium, or O'Hare doesn't fit neatly into our understanding of reality. And that realization doesn't just challenge what we know about UFOs, it challenges what we know about the world itself. Because if these events are linked, the implications stretch far beyond lights in the sky. They point to a mystery woven into the very fabric of human experience, one we're only now starting to trace. In the shadow of the Phoenix Lights mystery, one question looms larger than the rest. What does the government actually know? The push for transparency began almost immediately after the event, with researchers filing Freedom of Information Act requests faster than officials could dodge them. What they got back was less than satisfying: pages upon pages of heavily redacted documents, entire paragraphs blacked out like censored wartime telegrams. One particularly telling file from Luke Air Force Base contained 8 full pages where only the dates and a single cryptic sentence remained visible. Visual contact confirmed, no further action taken. The rest erased. For those digging for answers, it felt like trying to read a book with every other chapter ripped out. The battle for disclosure took on new urgency when retired Air Force personnel started coming forward with whispers of classified briefings. One former radar technician, speaking on condition of anonymity, described being shown footage from that night, clear, high-resolution images of the V-shaped object, only to be told it was above his pay grade. Another insider claimed certain files were abruptly reclassified after 1997, moved to a secure facility in Nevada. Even the late Senator John McCain, known for his no-nonsense approach, reportedly pressed the Pentagon for answers, only to receive a watered-down briefing that left him visibly frustrated. When they won't even give me a straight answer, he allegedly told aides, "You know something's off." Activists have spent decades piecing together fragments, cross-referencing declassified documents with witness testimonies. Some breakthroughs did emerge, like the 2012 release of FBI memos acknowledging unknown aerial phenomena in Arizona that matched no known aircraft. But for every sliver of truth, there were a dozen dead ends. One researcher discovered a suspicious gap in military flight logs for March 13, 1997, a 12-hour window where no training exercises were recorded despite official claims. Another found radar data from Sky Harbor Airport mysteriously corrupted for the exact time frame of the sightings. The pattern was impossible to ignore. The more compelling the lead, the more likely it was to vanish into bureaucratic oblivion. The real sting came when similar FOIA efforts in other countries yielded starkly different results. While the U.S. stonewalled, Belgium's Air Force openly acknowledged its own triangular UFO encounters, releasing radar data and pilot transcripts. Even the UK's Ministry of Defense declassified files admitting they had no explanation for a wave of sightings in the 90s. The contrast was damning. Why were allies transparent while America's files stayed locked away? For researchers, the redactions themselves became a kind of evidence, not of aliens necessarily, but of a system terrified of its own secrets. What makes the secrecy so infuriating isn't just the withheld information, but the way it warps public trust. When every blacked-out line feels like a missing puzzle piece, it's easy to spiral into conspiracy. The irony, the government's obsession with control may have backfired, because when you refuse to explain a mile-wide craft over a major city, you don't stop people from believing in UFOs, you just make them wonder what else you're hiding. And that lingering doubt, more than any lights in the sky, is what keeps the Phoenix Lights alive decades later, because some questions refuse to stay buried, no matter how many documents you redact. The Phoenix Lights didn't just captivate witnesses, they ignited the imagination of storytellers, weaving their way into the fabric of pop culture with a grip that still hasn't loosened. Hollywood was one of the first to take notice. Just a year after the incident, the blockbuster Independence Day featured a chilling scene where an enormous alien mothership drifts silently over the desert, its shadow swallowing entire cities, a visual straight out of Phoenix witness testimonies. The parallels were so striking that even skeptics raised eyebrows. Director Roland Emmerich admitted drawing inspiration from real UFO reports, calling the Phoenix Lights the kind of event that makes you wonder what's really out there. The film's success cemented the image of massive, hovering crafts in public consciousness, blurring the line between fiction and a phenomenon thousands swore was real. Documentaries seized on the mystery even faster. The Phoenix Lights, We Are Not Alone, released in 2005, became a touchstone for UFO researchers, blending raw footage with interviews from military insiders and shell-shocked witnesses. Its stark contrast to sensationalized alien fare gave it an air of credibility, winning over audiences who'd normally dismiss the topic, but it was the lesser-known films that dug deeper. I Know What I Saw, directed by Emmy-winning journalist James Fox, used the Phoenix case as a centerpiece to challenge the stigma around UFO testimony, featuring Governor Symington's bombshell confession alongside pilots and scientists. These works didn't just entertain, they framed the event as a cultural turning point, a moment when the public's trust in official narratives began to crack. Television writers couldn't resist either. The X-Files, already deep into its alien mythology by 1997, echoed Phoenix in episodes like Triangle and Dreamland, where silent, city-sized crafts hover with ominous intent. Even sitcoms like The Simpsons and Family Guy couldn't help but poke fun, turning the lights into punchlines that doubled as reluctant acknowledgments. This happened. We all saw it. Now what? Music offered a more abstract homage. Experimental bands like Tool wove audio clips of Phoenix news reports into their tracks, while indie artists penned lyrics about desert lights and government lies. The event became shorthand for the unexplainable, a symbol of humanity's smallness against the vast unknown. Why does this case, out of countless UFO sightings, hold such creative sway? The answer lies in its contradictions. Here was a phenomenon witnessed by thousands, yet dismissed by authorities, a spectacle caught on tape, yet denied by science. A moment that felt both profoundly alien and deeply personal. Artists thrive on tension, and the Phoenix lights serve up the ultimate unresolved chord, one that still hums in the background of our collective curiosity. Whether portrayed as warning or wonder, their legacy in pop culture proves one thing: some mysteries refuse to be boxed into tidy endings. They demand we keep looking up. Every March, as the desert air turns warm and the night skies clear over Arizona, something extraordinary happens. Scattered across Phoenix, small groups gather in living rooms, community centers, and even public parks, not for a typical reunion, but to share the one experience that forever bound their lives together. These are the Phoenix Lights eyewitnesses, now decades older but still carrying the weight of what they saw. The gatherings brim with an energy that's equal parts camaraderie and unresolved tension. One attendee, a retired nurse named Linda, brings a yellowed sketch she drew that night, a jagged V-shape with precise dots where the lights hovered. Across the room, a former air traffic controller named David nods in recognition. "That's it," he murmurs, "exactly what showed up on my radar." The emotional undercurrent of these meetings is impossible to ignore. Some attendees speak in hushed tones, as though still afraid of being ridiculed. Others, like construction worker Miguel, find catharsis in finally being believed. "For 20 years, my buddies called me Spaceman," he laughs, gripping a faded photograph of the lights taken from his backyard. But here, these people know I'm not crazy. The gatherings often turn somber when discussions circle back to unanswered questions. A veteran pilot's voice cracks as he recounts how the event cost him promotions after he refused to retract his testimony. "They wanted me to say it was flares," he says, "but my integrity wasn't for sale." What makes these reunions remarkable isn't just the shared trauma, it's the meticulous detailed preservation. Binders of handwritten accounts, meticulously labeled VHS tapes, and even flight logs from March 13, 1997, are passed around like sacred texts. One family brings a camcorder recording of their terrified reactions, their young daughter's voice whispering, "Daddy, why is the sky alive?" These artifacts form a collective counter-argument to official dismissals, a grassroots archive demanding recognition. The annual Phoenix Lights Anniversary Conference has become the most visible hub for this movement. Held at a modest hotel ballroom, it draws researchers, journalists, and even curious newcomers alongside the original witnesses. The highlight is always the witness circle, where each person steps forward to recount their story. The room falls silent as a former police sergeant describes the flood of panicked calls that overwhelmed dispatch. A school teacher chokes up recalling how her students clung to her, watching the lights through classroom windows. The stories vary in location and perspective, but the core remains unnervingly consistent, an encounter with something that defied explanation, burned into memory with cinematic clarity. Over time, these gatherings have evolved beyond mere nostalgia. Workshops now teach attendees how to file FOIA requests or analyze radar data. Guest speakers range from physicists debunking debunkers to congressmen advocating for government transparency. But the most powerful moments are unscripted. The widow who brings her husband's journal, filled with sketches he made until his dying day, or the now-grown children who only understood their parents' obsession after seeing the lights themselves years later. The reunions have birthed something unexpected, a multi-generational quest for answers. Perhaps the most poignant ritual occurs at dusk on the anniversary. Crowds gather at the exact spots where the lights were seen: rooftops, desert overlooks, even a quiet cul-de-sac where neighbors first spilled into the street pointing skyward. They don't expect a reappearance. They come to bear witness to the witnesses, to affirm that mysteries don't expire with time. As the stars emerge, you'll hear the same quiet refrain: "We're still here. We still remember." It's not a demand for vindication anymore. It's a testament to the enduring human need to say, "This happened, it mattered." And in a world that often dismisses the unexplained, that simple act of remembrance might be the most radical response of all. Modern technology has a way of breathing new life into old mysteries, and the Phoenix Lights are no exception. 2 decades after that infamous night, researchers armed with cutting-edge tools have begun sifting through the grainy VHS tapes and faded photographs with fresh eyes. High-resolution drone cameras now capture details invisible to 90s-era camcorders. Artificial intelligence can analyze flight patterns, light dispersion, and even witness testimonies for hidden correlations. A team at the University of Arizona recently used machine learning to enhance the most infamous footage, the Hendrix tape, isolating subtle anomalies in the light's movement that defy conventional physics. The acceleration patterns don't match any known aircraft or natural phenomenon. Lead researcher Dr. Elena Vasquez noted, "There's no inertia, no gradual buildup, just instantaneous changes in trajectory that shouldn't be possible." But technology giveth and technology taketh away. The same advancements that reveal new clues also make hoaxes dangerously convincing. Deepfake algorithms can now generate hyper-realistic UFO footage frame by frame, while AI voice synthesizers mimic panicked 911 calls with eerie accuracy. Even the most promising new evidence walks a tightrope between revelation and deception. Some researchers argue we've reached a paradox. The tools that could crack the Phoenix Lights mystery are also the ones muddying the waters beyond recognition. One tantalizing possibility lies in the skies themselves. The same drone swarms once dismissed as sci-fi can now replicate portions of the Phoenix Lights formation, hundreds of synchronized LEDs moving in precise, silent patterns. Military contractors have openly demonstrated similar tech for night operations. Could this explain the later orb sightings? Perhaps, but drone experts quickly point out the limitations. Battery life in 1997 wouldn't have allowed hours of sustained flight, let alone the mile-wide scale described. And then there's the silence. Modern drones still whine like angry mosquitoes, nothing like the dead quiet witnesses reported. The real breakthrough might come from above Earth entirely. Commercial satellite networks like Maxar now archive decades of high-resolution orbital imagery. A crowdsourced initiative called Skywatch has spent 3 years combing through archived satellite data from March 13th, searching for anomalies. Their most intriguing find, a thermal blotch near the Estrella Mountains from that night, inconsistent with known military activity, a faint V-shaped heat signature with no corresponding aircraft transponder. It's far from proof, but it raises new questions about what might have been missed while everyone was looking skyward instead of down. Yet for all our computational power, some truths resist digitization. The human element, the visceral, unshakable certainty of those who stood beneath those lights, defies algorithmic analysis. No AI can replicate the way a seasoned pilot's voice shakes describing something his training never prepared him for. Technology might sharpen blurry footage or cross-reference radar data, but it can't replace the weight of collective witness, and that's the heart of the Phoenix Light's enduring power. They live in that liminal space between what our tools can measure and what our senses insist is real. The irony, the more we advance, the clearer it becomes that some mysteries aren't puzzles to be solved, but mirrors reflecting the limits of our understanding. Perhaps the final word belongs to an unexpected source: archival audio from the control tower at Luke Air Force Base, quietly declassified in 2019. Amid the static, an unidentified voice mutters something rarely discussed in official reports. Whatever that thing is, the controller says, it's rewriting the playbook up there. Decades later, with all our satellites and supercomputers, that assessment might still be the most accurate one we've got. Social media has become the unofficial archive of the Phoenix Lights, a digital campfire where eyewitnesses, skeptics, and investigators gather to dissect the mystery in real time. On Reddit, threads dating back over a decade still spark heated debates, with users poring over pixelated footage frame by frame, enhancing contrast or overlaying flight path data from 1997. One viral post titled "The Math Doesn't Add Up" gained traction when an aerospace engineer calculated the object's estimated size based on witness coordinates, concluding it would have required a propulsion system defying known physics. Another thread crowdsourced a timeline of military radio frequencies from that night, uncovering eerie gaps in communication during the sighting's peak. The beauty of these platforms lies in their democratization of research. A retired pilot in Phoenix can collaborate with a grad student in Oslo, pooling expertise no single institution could replicate. YouTube's role is even more transformative. Forgotten local news clips from the 90s, once buried in network vaults, now resurface with millions of views, their comment sections teeming with fresh analysis. Amateur investigators like UFO Chrono stitch together disparate videos, syncing timestamps to prove the lights traveled across Arizona in impossible silence. Others use 3D modeling software to recreate the V-shaped formation, testing how light would reflect off its alleged surface. But for every meticulous breakdown, there's a flood of clickbait. Phoenix Lights Finally Explained. Videos that cherry-pick data or peddle debunked theories. The algorithm doesn't discriminate between rigor and sensationalism, leaving newcomers drowning in noise. This crowd-sourced vigilance has its pitfalls. In 2018, a Reddit user claimed to possess smoking gun footage from a since-deceased Air Force officer. The clip spread like wildfire until forensic analysts noticed inconsistencies. The timestamp font didn't match military archive formats, and the officer's uniform bore outdated insignia. The hoax wasted hundreds of hours of volunteer sleuthing, eroding trust in legitimate research. Yet even failures reveal something profound. The hunger for answers is so intense, people will risk humiliation for a chance at closure. The real power of social media lies in its ability to bypass gatekeepers. When mainstream outlets ignored the Phoenix Lights, witnesses turned to niche forums and YouTube channels, building an alternative record free from editorial bias. Now, when someone stumbles upon their grandfather's dusty camcorder tape from that night, they don't send it to a news station, they upload it to a community that wants to believe. Whether that's a strength or a weakness depends on who you ask. For every credible lead surfaced by collective effort, there's a conspiracy rabbit hole twisting facts beyond recognition. But one thing's certain, the Phoenix Lights would have faded into obscurity without these digital guardians keeping the flame alive, proof that some mysteries refuse to be buried even by time. Where the official explanations fall short, imagination rushes in, and the Phoenix Lights have inspired some truly spectacular theories. At the tamer end of the spectrum, you've got the ancient astronaut crowd, who point to indigenous Hopi legends of sky spirits called the Kachina, said to descend from the stars in glowing vessels. Could the lights have been a modern echo of these age-old stories? Then there's the interdimensional hypothesis, championed by physicists like Dr. Jacques Vallée, who suggests the crafts might not be from another planet, but another reality entirely, briefly phasing into our world like a radio signal bleeding between stations. Proponents love citing the light's eerie silence and physics-defying maneuvers as hallmarks of something slipping through the fabric of space-time. But buckle up, because the theories only get wilder from there. Some researchers float the idea of a secret government time machine, pointing to declassified Cold War documents mentioning experimental chrono-engineering. Could the Phoenix Lights have been a test run for tech so advanced it loops back on itself? Skeptics scoff, but the timing is curious. 1997 was the height of black-budget aerospace projects, with rumors swirling about reverse-engineered alien tech at Area 51. And let's not forget the plasma-based lifeforms camp, who argue the lights were sentient energy beings, perhaps studying us like biologists observing microbes under a slide. The sheer creativity is almost admirable. These aren't just explanations, they're full-blown mythologies. Even Hollywood's wildest scripts pale next to the simulation theory crew, who proposed the lights were glitches in our cosmic matrix, rendering errors in the code of reality itself. Chat rooms light up with comparisons to video game pop-in effects, where distant objects suddenly materialize as the system loads them. And then there's the niche but persistent Future Humans faction, convinced the visitors were our own descendants returning to document a pivotal moment in history. Their evidence, the lights appeared near major population centers as if conducting a census. Here's the thing about these theories, they're not all equally outlandish. The interdimensional idea, for instance, draws from legitimate quantum physics concepts like string theory and brane worlds, and the plasma lifeform hypothesis. It's rooted in real scientific exploration of extremophiles organisms thriving in conditions once thought impossible. The problem isn't imagination, it's the leap from could to did without evidence. For every intriguing parallel, there's a canyon of unanswered questions. If the lights were time travelers, why hover ominously over a suburb instead of, say, landing on the White House lawn? If they were beings from another dimension, why conform so neatly to the classic flying V shape ingrained in our pop culture? That's the tightrope walk of the Phoenix Lights phenomenon. The official explanations feel hollow, but the alternatives often spiral into sci-fi fan fiction. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in the unexplored middle, a blend of misunderstood technology, atmospheric oddities, and yes, maybe a dash of the truly inexplicable. After all, the universe is under no obligation to make sense to us, and that's what keeps the mystery alive. Not the answers we've found, but the ones still shimmering just out of reach, like those lights over the Arizona desert. For years, Fife Symington played the perfect skeptic. As Arizona's governor during the Phoenix Lights event, he famously mocked the frenzy, staging a press conference where his aide lumbered onstage in a rubber alien costume. The message was clear: only fools took UFOs seriously. But a decade later, Symington did something no one saw coming. He admitted he'd been lying. In a 2007 interview, the former governor confessed he'd witnessed the lights himself that night, describing a gigantic, otherworldly craft moving silently over Phoenix. His reversal wasn't just startling, it was a direct contradiction to the persona he'd carefully cultivated. So what changed? Symington's confession peeled back the layers of a man caught between duty and disbelief. On one hand, he was a former Air Force officer, a Republican governor with a reputation for pragmatism. On the other, he'd stood in his backyard that night, staring slack-jawed at something his training couldn't explain. His initial dismissal, he later claimed, was about maintaining order. People were panicking, he told reporters. I thought if I made light of it, I could calm things down. But the subtext was darker. As governor, Symington had ties to military contractors and aerospace giants, industries that thrived on secrecy. Admitting he'd seen something unexplainable risked more than ridicule. It risked shaking public trust in the very institutions he represented. The timing of his confession raises its own questions. 2007 wasn't just a random year, it was the 10th anniversary of the Phoenix Lights, sparking renewed media interest. Symington was no longer in office, free from political fallout, but skeptics noted another detail. His post-gubernatorial career had stalled after a fraud conviction later overturned. Was this a play for relevance, a way to rebrand as a truth-teller? Symington denied it, insisting his conscience had gnawed at him for years. "I owed it to those witnesses," he said, his voice uncharacteristically earnest. "They weren't crazy, they saw what I saw." What makes his reversal so compelling isn't just the admission itself, but the specifics he offered. Unlike vague UFO accounts, Symington described tactile details. The way the craft's silhouette blotted out constellations, the absence of engine noise despite its low altitude. He even hinted at pressure from certain agencies to keep quiet, though he refused to name names. Former staffers later recalled odd moments, Symington uncharacteristically cancelling meetings to pore over UFO files or snapping at aides who joked about the lights. The pieces painted a portrait of a man wrestling with an experience that clashed with his worldview. Yet the most revealing moment came not in interviews but in a private conversation leaked to the press. At a 2011 conference, Symington was overheard telling another speaker, "Whatever that thing was, it wasn't human, and I'll go to my grave knowing that." The raw certainty in his voice, stripped of political polish, suggested something deeper than guilt or publicity seeking. It sounded like a man who'd glimpsed a reality he couldn't unsee, one that rewired his understanding of the possible. Symington's confession did more than add credibility to the Phoenix Lights. It exposed the tightrope walked by those in power when faced with the unexplainable. Do you dismiss it to preserve order, even if it means betraying your own eyes? Or do you risk your reputation to validate thousands of ordinary people who've been called liars? His answer, delayed but undeniable, became its own kind of evidence, not just about what flew over Phoenix, but about the cost of hiding the truth. And in the end, that might be the most revealing sighting of all. The debate over the Phoenix Lights has never been a simple binary. It's a sprawling, often heated conversation where science, skepticism, and the surreal collide. On one side, you've got the debunkers armed with Occam's razor and a deep suspicion of extraordinary claims. Their case hinges on two pillars: misidentification and military secrecy. They argue the initial V-shaped formation was likely a formation of aircraft, possibly stealth bombers flying in tight coordination, their silhouettes obscured by darkness. The later orbs, just flares from routine training exercises, their glow magnified by atmospheric conditions. Skeptics like astronomer Neil deGrasse Tyson have pointed out that human perception is notoriously fallible, especially under stress. The brain fills in gaps, he noted in a 2018 debate. A few distant lights become a structured craft because that's the narrative we're primed to see. But believers counter with a mountain of inconsistencies. If the V-shaped object was conventional aircraft, why did radar operators report speeds and maneuvers impossible for 90s-era tech? Why would flares hover motionless for half an hour or appear dozens of miles from their drop zone? The most compelling rejoinder comes from the witnesses themselves, people like Dr. Lynn Kaitai, a physician who initially dismissed UFO claims until she photographed the lights from her balcony. "I didn't want to believe," she admitted in a 2020 interview. "But the evidence left me no out." Her case epitomizes the believer's core argument. When hundreds of trained observers, pilots, cops, even a governor report the same inexplicable details, dismissing them all as mistaken requires its own leap of faith. The military's shifting stories only fuel the fire. initially denying any activity, then blaming flares, then failing to explain why their own personnel contradicted those claims. It's a pattern that smells less like coincidence and more like damage control. UFO researcher Leslie Kean highlights this in her book UFOs, citing internal memos where Air Force officials privately admitted the flare explanation does not account for all witness reports. For believers, that gap between official statements and evidence isn't just sloppy reporting, it's proof of a cover-up. Yet the debunkers aren't without nuance. Some concede that while most sightings have prosaic explanations, a tiny fraction, including Phoenix, remain stubborn outliers. Astrophysicist Dr. Kevin Nuth has modeled the light's reported flight patterns, concluding they'd require energy outputs orders of magnitude beyond current human technology. His stance, "We can't yet explain it," doesn't mean it's aliens, but it does mean we should stop pretending it's solved. The heart of the debate isn't just about lights in the sky. It's about how we handle the unknown. Skeptics worry that crying UFO discourages rigorous investigation, while believers argue that reflexive dismissal is just as unscientific. Both sides agree on one thing: the Phoenix lights demand better answers than we've gotten. And until those arrive, the desert sky that night remains a Rorschach test, showing us not just what might be out there, but what we're willing to see. For Sandra Watkins, a retired high school science teacher, the Phoenix lights didn't just pass overhead, they shattered the bedrock of her reality. "I spent 30 years teaching Newtonian physics," she recalls, her voice still carrying the weight of that night. "Then I looked up and saw something that laughed at every law I'd ever taught." What haunted Sandra wasn't just the sight of the massive V-shaped craft, it was the silence. No sonic boom, no turbulence, just this gliding, like gravity was a suggestion. The encounter left her sleepless for weeks, poring over aviation manuals and Einstein's notes, desperate to reconcile what she'd seen with what science said was possible. Eventually, she did something unimaginable before that night. She redesigned her curriculum. "I started telling students, here's what the textbooks say, and here's what we can't explain yet." That craft taught me humility. The universe doesn't owe us tidy answers. Then there's Mark Renard, a former aerospace engineer who scoffed at UFO stories until March 13th, rewrote his skepticism in Fire Across the Sky. "I was the guy who debunks sightings at parties," he admits, rubbing the back of his neck. "Then I watched those lights make a right-angle turn at 3,000 miles an hour. No inertia, no gradual curve, just click like a car changing lanes, except this thing was bigger than a stadium." For Mark, the cognitive dissonance was physical. "I actually got sick, threw up in my driveway. Your brain can't process something that breaks its wiring." The aftermath was lonelier than he expected. Colleagues dismissed his account. His fiancée left after he wouldn't drop the alien nonsense. But the real surprise, the relief, turns out living in denial is exhausting. "Now when I see footage of Navy pilots chasing UFOs, I don't roll my eyes, I nod. Welcome to the club, boys." The most unexpected transformation might be Reverend Daniel Greer, a Baptist pastor who saw the lights while driving home from a prayer meeting. "At first, I begged God for it to be a test," he confesses. "The sheer scale of the object, like a floating city block, challenged his understanding of creation itself." We're taught we're made in God's image, but what if we're not the only ones? Instead of fear, he found wonder. His sermons took a radical turn, blending scripture with astrophysics, urging his congregation to see science and spirit as facets of the same mystery. Not everyone approved. Church attendance dipped, but for those who stayed, we started wrestling with bigger questions. Not are we alone, but why would a creator stop at just us? These aren't just stories about lights in the sky. They're about the cracks those lights left in people's understanding of themselves. A nurse who quit her job to study astrobiology, a cop who started carrying a Geiger counter in his trunk, a 12-year-old who became an aerospace engineer precisely because no adult could explain what she'd seen. The Phoenix Lights didn't just pass over Arizona, they etched themselves into the lives of those beneath them, leaving behind not answers but a permanent unrest. Because once you've seen the impossible, the world never fits the same way again. And maybe that's the real phenomenon here, not what flew overhead, but what it stirred in the people still looking up decades later, chasing the shadow of a question too big to hold. What makes the Phoenix Lights more than just another UFO case isn't just the lights themselves, it's what they represent. This wasn't a fleeting blur in the night sky or a grainy photo passed around conspiracy circles. It was a shared moment of awe, a crack in the ordinary that forced thousands of people to question everything they thought they knew about the world above them. The endurance of this mystery lies in its sheer undeniability. You can dismiss one witness, maybe even a handful, but when pilots, police officers, a governor, and hundreds of everyday citizens all describe the same impossible thing with chilling consistency, it stops being about belief and starts being about evidence. The Phoenix Lights don't just ask us to consider UFOs, they demand we explain how so many credible people could be so collectively wrong. But there's something deeper at work here, something that transcends the debate over extraterrestrials or secret military tech. The Phoenix Lights tap into a fundamental human tension, our simultaneous hunger for answers and our terror of what those answers might reveal. Think about it. We've mapped the ocean floor and sequenced our own DNA, yet the idea that something could slip through our understanding unhitches us. That's why this case sticks. It's not just about what was seen, it's about the lingering discomfort of the unclassified, the unquantifiable. The lights didn't just hover over Phoenix, they hovered over the line between the known and the unknowable, and that's a line we're all drawn to, whether we admit it or not. This phenomenon mirrors our oldest stories. Every culture has its myths of sky gods, chariots of fire, or spirits descending from the stars. The Phoenix Lights feel like a modern echo of those legends because they speak the same language, a language of wonder and unease. When Governor Symington finally confessed he'd seen the lights too, his words carried the same bewildered reverence as ancient scribes describing celestial visions. The details change. Bronze Age observers saw winged deities where we see geometric crafts, but the trembling questions remain. Are we being watched? Are we alone? The Phoenix Lights didn't invent these questions, they simply dragged them into the fluorescent glare of the modern world, where science and smartphones can't dissolve them. Perhaps that's the real legacy, not the lights themselves, but what they revealed about us. In an age of deepfakes and algorithmically tailored realities, the Phoenix Lights stand as a stubborn anomaly. No amount of debunking can erase the visceral certainty of those who stood beneath that craft. No government memo can unring the bell of thousands saying, "I know what I saw." And that collective witness, that refusal to be gaslit, might be the most revolutionary act of all. Because in a world where truth feels increasingly malleable, the Phoenix Lights remind us that some mysteries can't be tweeted away, some experiences resist spin. They force us to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, and in doing so, they quietly challenge the very systems that claim to have all the answers. So the lights endure, not because they offer closure, but because they refuse it. They linger in the cultural imagination like a half-remembered dream, specific enough to feel real, elusive enough to keep us searching. And maybe that's exactly where they belong, not as a case to be solved, but as a mirror held up to our own limitations. After all, the night sky has always been humanity's first classroom, teaching us humility before the vast unknown. The Phoenix Lights simply handed us a new lesson, one we're still struggling to read. Could the skies over Phoenix or any city once again become the stage for something unexplainable? The question isn't just speculative. It's rooted in a shifting landscape where unexplained aerial phenomena are no longer dismissed as fringe fantasy. Recent congressional hearings on UAP's unidentified anomalous phenomena have ripped the lid off decades of government secrecy, with military pilots testifying under oath about encounters that defy conventional physics. If the 90s were an era of ridicule, today's climate feels like the pendulum swinging hard toward transparency. The Pentagon's once tight grip on UFO narratives has visibly loosened, with the 2023 NASA independent study even acknowledging that UAPs pose a threat to flight safety and warrant serious scientific inquiry. But what does this mean for another Phoenix Light-scale event? The answer hinges on technology and tension. Civilian drone swarms, now capable of intricate light formations, could easily mimic some aspects of the 1997 sightings, though they still can't explain the sheer size or silence described that night. Meanwhile, military testing has only grown more advanced. The rise of hypersonic prototypes and classified aerospace projects raises an uncomfortable possibility. The next mass sighting might not be extraterrestrial but terrestrial, a next-gen black project accidentally revealed. Yet even this theory stumbles when held against the most baffling UAP reports, like the infamous Tic Tac incident, where Navy jets chased objects accelerating instantaneously without exhaust plumes or sonic booms. The real wild card lies in society's readiness. Unlike the 90s, when witnesses were left to fend off mockery alone, today's digital ecosystems amplify every anomaly instantly. Imagine a Phoenix Light scenario unfolding now. Smartphone cameras with night vision, live streams triangulating sightings in real time, AI analyzing flight patterns before the object even leaves airspace. Transparency advocates argue this democratization of evidence makes another cover-up impossible, but skeptics warn it also makes hoaxes dangerously persuasive. The difference this time, institutional momentum, with the U.S. government mandated to declassify UAP records by 2024 under the National Defense Authorization Act. The pressure for answers has shifted from conspiracy theorists to Congress. Perhaps the most telling clue lies in the language itself. The Pentagon's pivot from UFO to UAP wasn't just semantics, it was a calculated rebrand, stripping away the baggage of flying saucers to make the topic palatable for mainstream scrutiny. When intelligence officials now openly admit they're tracking objects that appear to defy known aerodynamic principles, it's not a confession, it's an invitation. An invitation to consider that whatever hovered over Phoenix might not have been a one-off but a preview. The ultimate irony, the same skies that once left witnesses feeling isolated now link them to a growing chorus: military pilots, senators, even former presidents, all echoing some version of "we don't know what these things are." That collective uncertainty, once a source of stigma, has become the seed of something new. A world where the next Phoenix Lights won't end with laughter, but with something far more radical: the humility to say, maybe we're not the only players in this universe. And that shift, more than any sighting, might be the real phenomenon worth watching. Decades after that strange night over Arizona, the Phoenix Lights remain a riddle wrapped in desert sky, a phenomenon that refuses to fade into the footnotes of history. Whether you trust the mountain of witness testimonies or suspect a shadow game of military misdirection, one truth lingers: this wasn't a blurry dot on a shaky camera. It was an event that rewired the lives of thousands, from the pilot who quit commercial aviation to the governor who carried his secret for 10 years. The files may be redacted, the explanations half-baked, but the questions still burn. Why would flares move in perfect formation for hours without smoke or sound? How could radar track an object performing maneuvers that should have shattered any known aircraft? And why, after all this time, does the government story still crumble under scrutiny? What makes the Phoenix Lights endure isn't just the mystery of what happened, it's what the event says about our hunger for answers in a world that often withholds them. This case is a litmus test for curiosity. Dive into the declassified documents and you'll find gaps wide enough to fly a V-shaped craft through. Listen to the witnesses and you'll hear voices frayed by decades of disbelief. Scan the skies today with fresh tools, drones, AI, satellite networks, and you might just spot echoes of that night in newer UAP sightings. The truth isn't handed down, it's pieced together by ordinary people refusing to let the extraordinary be erased. So where does that leave us? Maybe the most honest answer is also the simplest. We still don't know, but not knowing isn't an endpoint, it's an invitation. An invitation to dig deeper, to question louder, to watch the skies with the same mix of wonder and wariness that Phoenix felt in 1997. The lights didn't just vanish, they left behind a trail of breadcrumbs, in witness sketches, in shaky home videos, in the quiet confessions of those who have spent years chasing shadows. Your turn now. Hit pause, open a new tab, fall down the rabbit hole, compare the timelines, study the flight paths, weigh the theories against your own logic. And when you're done, ask yourself the one question that haunts every viewer who's made it this far. If it wasn't us lighting up the sky that night, then who was holding the match?